Good morning, everyone. It is June the 2nd, and this is our Genie seminar. And we welcome you and remind you that this is being recorded, and you are, by participating, giving your permission that it will be available to the public for anyone who's interested in using our Genie seminar technology, with the hope that we will have groups like this around the world and start a movement very much like Alcoholics Anonymous, where we come together in this new method of education where people, instead of listening to talking heads, where you share your own personal genius and get a little skin in the game to try to solve the world's important puzzles. We have a lot of puzzles we're dealing with. To me, the most important one is the threat of nuclear warfare, but there's so many puzzles like global warming. We have pollution, we have things like greed, we have drug abuse, substance abuse, we have the issue of male shooters where people seem they get angry, they go and like to shoot up people, which seems to be a characteristic of male energy. And we have a whole variety of puzzles now that we have to solve, but the most critical thing from my perspective is that when Einstein told us that all of them, what's interesting about all of these is that they're all things that we create ourselves. You know, it's not something that's natural. Nature didn't make nuclear weapons. Nature has provided lots of forests and so on, and we're sort of destroying them. So the wonderful news is that if we are the creator of these problems, and what Einstein is telling us, if we can teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, then we can solve every one of those. And the beginning, of course, is the issue is, can we really change our thinking? And this is what I wanted to introduce as our topic today. Can we really change our way of thinking? Why is it that we have this problem, that we have four qualities that we said that are important? The four qualities that are most important are happiness, enough, love, and peace. If we're happy, as Aristotle said, that's one of the most important things in the world, if we can create happiness. And then if we have enough, one of the reasons we have war is because we make food and necessity scarce, so then people have to start fighting one another for limited resources. So happiness, enough, and love, if we can have unconditional love, and we simply say love for the benefit of love, not to see what we can get, giving to get, but really unconditional love. And of course, the last is if we can have blissful peace. And peace is not the opposite of war. Peace is a very active thing. It's blissful. It's a happy state of mind. There's a famous philosopher, if you remember the cartoon strip Peanuts. Peanuts said happiness is a state of mind. So if we can create a state of mind, that's the critical issue. And that's what we'd like to discuss here today. So we did talk about an example last time. This example of this magician who had a herd of sheep, and he was raising the herd of sheep for his dinner table. But he convinced the sheep that he was a benevolent leader who protected them, gave them food, and they all loved their master. They were not particularly aware that his main purpose was to fatten them up for his dinner table. And the question came up is, in fact, when he went to slaughter them, he even convinced them that they were doing a service, that they would enjoy the process of sacrificing themselves. Which is not very much different than what we do with suicide bombers, isn't it? Remember the suicide bombers in World War II and the suicide bomber, the kamikaze bombers, the idea that you're doing a service, you're doing something beneficial for the world when you make yourself a human bomb to kill other people. So the power of persuasion, the power of influence, it has to do with words. And then the question came up, if the if these sheep were sort of asleep, they were in a stupor. You know, the word stupor comes from the word in Latin, I think, stupid. The stupor means stupid. So they were kind of in a stupor. And the question is, would it be better for the sheep to remain in this state of stupor, where they believed that they were being treated very well and very happy to be raised for food or for somebody else's purpose? Or would it be better that they be informed? Should they be made aware with the idea that perhaps they could escape, they could find another life, or else they could maybe even bargain with their master and say, for example, don't eat me, I will provide you wool, for example. That would be maybe a compromise. But can we make that as an analogy to kind of the situation that we're in? And we know that Einstein told us one of our problems is that we are kind of in a stupor about the way we think. You know, that the way we think is based on the words that we use. And this is what I'd like to just review very briefly, why we now think that the understanding evolution, understanding our history is really important. And what is it about our history that makes us aware, consciously aware, wakes us up? The question, should we try to wake ourselves up? Should we try to wake up? They say, wake up and clean up, wise up, and make up with one another and learn to cooperate for a better world, or should we better stay in our stupor? So our evolution, what our evolution tells us, that I think is critical for this discussion, is that our ancestors, our new story started from a single cell. And that single cell, when it reproduced, its most important activity was procreation. So we know it divided to produce its identical self. When it produced its identical self, it created the reasonable intention to love our offspring or to love yourself. So we developed egotistical love, unconditional loving yourself, because whoever was created was your exact self. And then later in the course of evolution, when there was some variation and what was reproduced was something like yourself, but instead of being identical, it was more like a family member. So then we introduced parental love, or what's called filial love. And then as we began to produce more and more offspring, we began to produce groups of offspring and groups of families. So now we produced familial love, the idea of family love. And that was a third kind of love. And then in the course of evolution, when we became so complex, we went from one cell to trillions of cells, and it became more complex. Remember, it takes, you know, the first life, the single cell was alive and ready to be moving and so on at birth. You know, it takes us 9 months to create a new life, and probably almost 2 decades, maybe another 18 or 20 years before we're fully mature and that we're able to be responsible for ourselves. So then what happened, we divided our bisexual organism, that is an organism that had the male and female parts in one organism that did not need any outside influence to procreate. We became separate genders. We developed masculine and female energy. And then we developed a fourth kind of love, which we call erotic love, eroticism, where we're kind of compelled to want to mate, to come together. We have to do that in order to procreate. So we have these 4 kinds of love, and we have this happening in a very primitive society. Now, what's the bottom line of all this? And what I think we're being told is during these 4 kinds of love, in a rather primitive time, it was important that in order to survive, we had to be part of a tribe. We had to be allegiant to that tribe. And in order to survive, we generally had to get our supplies from others. And one of that way would be to produce enough offspring. So you produce enough offspring that other species can feed off of it, of one offspring. So early in our history, for billions of years, it became necessary that we become part of a tribe. And in order to survive, we had to travel as a tribe. We had to be allegiant to that tribe. And we had to be prepared to fight and go to war for that tribe in order to get food. So if we look at most every species, we see this other species travel in groups or tribes, and by working together, whether it's a wolf or sharks or whatever kinds of species, they travel together, and they make their survival by attacking and being warlike with others. There were no supermarkets. There probably wasn't adequate food, so they were competing for scarce food. And the bottom line is here, we became equipped with DNA our genetic inheritance to be part of a tribe and to deal with others by competing for win-lose competition. So you see if that makes sense. We were competing for win-lose competition, and we are instinctively or biologically programmed to share our unconditional love, to support our tribe, and to be prepared to fight and kill for others in order to manage. And then we developed something very new as we became more complex. We developed a cortex. So this is, you see, all part of our evolutionary story, the story of evolution. Somewhere along the line, perhaps a billion years ago, we began to develop a special kind of brain, which we call the cerebral cortex. And the other name that we've given for that cerebral cortex is a Genie organ. Why do we call it a Genie organ instead of a cerebral cortex? Well, cerebral cortex means it's located outside of the old brain. It just talks about its anatomy, its location. But now when we call it a Genie organ, we say, what is its function instead of its anatomy? And the function is it's able to create words and symbols, and it's able to create ideas, and it's able to give us a new way of looking at things or a new way of thinking. So what happened is our ancestors, because they had this Genie organ that could create symbols, what are the kind of symbols that we created? We created symbols that were basically tribal symbols. That is, words that supported our need to be part of a tribe and compete with others. We created symbols that essentially told us be prepared automatically, effortlessly, instinctively to be part of your tribe, to owe your allegiance to your tribe, be prepared to go to war and kill to support your own family tribe. So what are the kind of words we developed then? We developed words like symbols, like patriotic symbols, and we developed words that had to do with our country, whoever our tribe was. So we developed flags that talked about our particular group or our country, our nation, and then later we developed political symbols. So if you think about it, then when we finally develop a language, the language we've created are words that basically force our thinking into being part of a tribe and to be prepared to identify or create our energy for the benefit of our family. And out of that comes this one sentence that sums it all up. This is what we've talked about before. What is the one sentence that describes our culture from history, from our evolution? What's good for me? Of course, that's the egotistical love. What's good for my family? That's the familial love. What's good for my tribe? That's the tribal love. And then what's good for my reproduction, because that's my basic impulse. We have to survive. So then we get into our fourth kind of love. And all of our words and part of our vocabulary, you see, are tribal words that we learn. Now to begin to get the idea why we introduced our original Genie seminars with a new kind of category of words. that words are no longer tribal, but now we need to go to the next level of evolution, which would be global or universal language. What are the words that we can create that we don't have that would teach us to identify with our larger system rather than with our family? What are the words that would lead us to a new meme? What's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future? See, without language, the animal brain can only think of today, here and now. But when we can create stories using words that include past, present, and future, now we add time and we add space so we can think of our future, and we can create words that teach us a newer way of processing information. And that's where that's the point for today. We are now at a stage of evolution where we have the choice. And this was Barbara Marx Hubbard's basically genius, which she was telling us. We have a choice in our life. We can continue to evolve to higher levels where we go from tribal love to global or universal unconditional love, or we have the alternative possibility of staying where we are. And what Einstein is telling us, we become so intelligent that we will create bombs. And as long as we compete with one another for scarce resources, it'll only be a matter of time before someone pushes a button, and that'll be the end of our civilization. So the question that Barbara Marx Hubbard raised is, we're at a crossroads in our evolution. On one path, we have evolution moving ahead. The other path is devolution. We go back to our more primitive state where we essentially end our civilization and we start all over again, maybe from bacteria in the first cell to start our evolutionary process. And the question is, where do we stand? Are we aware of that possibility? And I think what Einstein is telling us, the way we've been thinking, we are just like those sheep. You know, we're really very happy with the idea that as long as we have what we need, we have money, we have whatever, we forget about the rest of us, and we tend to worship material and physical things and not the next level, which would be the four qualities we've talked about: happiness, enough, love, and peace. Can we move from a society which says our goal is to make as much money as we can, to be as much material, have the titles, or are we going to try to change our way of thinking? And here we have our group here that are at the cusp of that bifurcation of the road. Are we going to? We are the ones that seem to have the intelligence. We've had the opportunities to learn so far, and that's the question. Josephine gave me a wonderful word that I've been introduced in a new recent writing, that we're really kind of like sheeples. We are like those sheep. We're quite happy as long as we have our money, as long as we have our whatever. But meanwhile, the question is that it's only a matter of time before those other people are going to, as we've seen throughout history, our history is the story of people who have gotten wealth, they've gotten most of the power, and then the larger group that is being starved or being sacrificed gangs up together, they overthrow that smaller group of elite, and then we start all over again. We have a new society, we have a new world. So that's the picture I'm trying to present for you today. If you forget about the words in a way, but think about the picture and where we are today and see if that makes sense to you. And to what degree are we sheeples? Maybe we'd like to stay sheeples. Maybe we'd like to say, wake up, other people. Do we want to continue the situation where it's only a matter of time, as the experts are telling us, that someone will push the button and we can say goodbye to all that we love? And I'll just end this with one finish reminder. We also talked the last time about the Hawaiian incident. The Hawaiian incident where there was a false alarm, and at that time, people suddenly became aware that they had minutes to live. And what did they do? At that time, they started bargaining. They said, I will give up everything I own if you will just stop. They began to pray and bargain, please stop the bomb. And they were willing to give up at that point anything for 38 minutes. But not until that time. And as soon as the alarm was sounded, it said this was rescinded. This is a false alarm. 38 minutes later, all of that energy to do something to make a difference stopped. And they went back to being sheeples and saying, what's good for me for now? Let's eat, let's make more money, let's have more fun, and let's forget about these other things, and that'll be for the future. So I've tried to paint a little picture. Sometimes I'm a little wordy. I apologize for that, but I am doing the best I can to convey this story, and I'm going to share the talking stick to whoever would like to have some thoughts about all this.
Don, as you were talking, and you were going through like the kinds of love, right? And you were stepping us through the stages. I couldn't help but liken it to the Bible, right?
Yes.
Think about God as us, right? And the first love is you create in your own image, which is Adam, right? And then you talked about the separation, into one organism into two, which is then it's the male and female. Then it's the Adam and Eve, right? Then it's that love. Then it's the creation of children, right? Which is, Cain and Abel. Then it's the creation of the society or the larger collective.
Josephine, can you talk closer to your mic?
Sure, I can put on my headset. So you're gonna make me repeat everything, or did you guys hear some of it?
I heard pieces of it.
Oh, Katie said she heard me. So it's just the progression in the Bible from personal love, right? Creating, loving ourselves in our own image with Adam, and then the separation of one into two, which is the Adam and Eve. Then it's the children. Then it's the society, right? Then it's the wars and factions, And then I couldn't help but think about Jesus's message, right? Which if you follow the progression, it's now we're up to the point of either accepting that message that was brought as wisdom. And I think that's where we are. And I don't want to make this about religion, right? I want to make this more philosophical and more about the message that's been with us, it seems, for, thousands of years that we still haven't gotten as a people, right? Mm-hmm. And even to the point of Jesus going to the cross and dying, right? And still being forgiven of these people who aren't listening. So I guess my only point is I'm trying to imagine what could we possibly do or say to others to make them listen. I think it has to do with us changing ourselves, and people who are willing to change themselves, those are the ones who become our target audience. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's one word or one sentence or one way to deliver the message. There's lots of ways to deliver the message about us changing our way of thinking and moving to this, this new way of thinking. So that's what I'm taking away from this morning's message.
I think it's a very good point. And I think it's very hard to reach people sometimes through what they may interpret, whether it's intended that way or not, as proselytizing. And it seems people will automatically turn a deaf ear on that. It sets up an inherent resistance. So you have to ask yourself, what reaches people in all walks of life? Is there a common denominator? And before they dismiss you out of hand, because what we're doing here is on a very high keel, but there are people who are going to think that we're a bunch of people saying repent for the time is at hand, like on a street corner, and they immediately tune you out. However, what reaches them? What's common to everybody? Unfortunately, I think the answer is nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
I think that's common to absolutely everybody in all walks of life. Unfortunately, that comes across as rather heavy-handed, which I think, Don, you're trying to avoid. But it is at the root of what we're talking about. You know, nobody wants to die, and we want to go on. It's human nature. It's a human spirit. We know we're not here forever, but you know what? We don't care. We convince ourselves every day that we are. So that's just my thought process on the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And so the traditional answer to both of you in history has been, well, if you don't agree with me, off with your heads. That has been the traditional answer, right?
It worked well for a while, but
I'm going to go to war with you. Off with your heads. You know. Now, I don't think we could go that path, but I do think that that's kind of the kind of thinking that has, you know, been age old, and the answer to all conflict and all differences amongst human beings is if you don't go with what I say, off with your head, right?
well, we don't do that here, but that still happens in other cultures and in other parts of the world.
Yes, it
And
does.
unfortunately, you know, you find that to an extent, it's effective. And I really don't mean that.
I rest my case.
I don't mean that in a jocular way, but, you know, you have certain cultures that say if you do this, you're going to lose a finger, you're going to lose an arm, or worse. And it tends to bring people into line. But we can't go down that road. Because why? Well, we're civilized, or so we think.
All you have to do is that Pacey and I went to see John Wick 3. So all you have to do is go see John Wick 3, and it answers all questions about, you know, how to move forward here, right? You know, we develop an assassin, organization, and we just go and assassinate people that have not, you know, that don't agree with.
You know, John, there are times when you're a very scary individual.
Yeah, it is true. Kate's going to take the talking feather a minute, just because sometimes you do get a little scary on me. I haven't seen The Matrix yet. Pacey was talking about The Matrix and how it was relevant to what's going on in the sheeple movement. And I haven't even seen that, so I'm not sure I can go to John Wick just yet. But what as a Western woman that came of age at the same year, right at Barbie time, as we ask ourselves, why are we here? You know, as you get deeper and deeper into that question, you kind of come to the conclusion that because over our lives we go through these issues where we have anger problems or whatever, we do the introspection and you realize that we're here to learn to unconditionally love. And, you know, what does that mean? I think it's the ongoing life lesson of how do I love you like I love myself? Because of course we're going to love ourselves. We're going to put ourselves first always, until you break out and bust free, I think, of these boxes a little bit and say, you know, I finally realized that unless it's great for y'all, for everyone, for people I haven't touched, for the poverty, for the cries of the poor and the cries of the earth that don't seem to be heard, until those can be heard, we can't learn any more about this love. We have to, I don't know, you know, I'm kind of, you got to love, as, you know, I don't have a lot of family, but I'm around a lot of people. But nevertheless, I've always known if I take care of the earth, she'll take care of me. And so this love of earth is, but it's very, people don't want to hear it, you know. It's like Brad was kind of saying, the proselytizing or whatever. I thought what Don and Joseph, and what you all have spoken this morning is just so powerful and beautiful. But I think that if we can kind of ask ourselves these paradoxical 10 commandment questions, you know, how do we break free? How do I love beyond measure, even though the guy isn't lovable? You know, how do we do those things? And I'll return talking, Brother, and thank you for listening.
One of the things that I, growing up back in India, learned as part of our cultural cultural way to live was to respect everything, and love everything. So, uh, fortunately or unfortunately, what happened is in India, um, um, when the actual civilization started, the Hindu civilization, um, you can call it lack of scientific knowledge or whatever, but this, in order for society to not to have a very large negative impact on the environment, they started creating so many of these deities. So sun is a god, moon is a god, cow is a god. Plants are god. There are several plants. You will not believe, people in India, they wake up in the morning, there is this plant called tulsi plant, and they will take water. They will first pray to the sun in the morning, and then they will put the water on the tulsi plant and pray to the tulsi plant in the sense. So everything is respected. There is this cause and effect, imbibed in the culture, where if you hurt an ant now in this life, you can be the ant next life and somebody will hurt you. So I'm just piggybacking on what Brad said. uh, and then I started doing my schooling education, and I came to know about sun and moon and all these scientific things. So I started questioning my mom and everything. As a child, as a kid, I used to, coming from a very very traditional family, I used to pray every day, and I learned all the hymns, all very complex Sanskrit hymns and everything. And then when I became so-called scientific person by knowing a few things here and there in my school, I started questioning my mom, and slowly but steadily, I was completely cut off from all these things till I was probably 25, 26 years old, when I started understanding the larger meaning of it. So while the scientific mind and scientific world does bring logic in our mind, there are certain things even science has not been able to explain today, even till today. um, why do some of us have a lot of love to give? Why do, unlike what you said, Brad, some people commit suicide or try to commit suicide because they might have everything, but they are so sad somewhere, something, without any genuine reason. They are completely sad and crying day in and day out. So there are certain things which science cannot explain, the human biology in the sense, and that is where a little bit of faith, a little bit of what we are doing here is creating a new culture, creating a new group where we can co-create and share without any fear of retribution, is what is needed.
Bravo! I think that I think you very insightful and I think right on.
Thank you.
I want to hear from Pacey now from the Love Van.
I was sort of hypnotized watching the view from the driver's window a little while ago as he was just moving on down the highway like Willie Nelson.
Well, that's what I'm doing, just trying not to have an accident.
You mean personally or with a vehicle?
I'm trying to stay alive like you guys are talking about.
Oh, that's a wonderful angle. That's going to make me nauseous.
It is, I thought I thought what Josephine said was really kind of set off a light bulb for me, is that although we might not agree about some of the religious perspectives, I think that religion came to the same conclusions that kind of Dad has come to a long time ago. Just I think that the reasons that religion claims it has its conclusions are different than kind of a scientific or evolutionary perspective. But most religions came to the conclusion a long time ago that we have to behave differently. And maybe even more insightfully, before there were weapons of mass destruction, um, this conclusion, people came to that. And maybe it was to control people or control population. But it's interesting that the realities or the things that we're trying to propose and enact, have been thought of generations ago, suggest that and religion has not been terribly effective from my perspective in kind of changing the way people behave. And I wonder if there's worth exploring, why are we resistant to change when we've been working on the same kinds of changes for generations?
I think it's worth exploring, but I'm darned if I know where it takes us from the standpoint that in our civilization, I don't think there's ever been anything as paradoxical and baffling as organized religion, in the sense that it does all these things that are inherently inimic to one another. It brings people together and it separates people at the same time. It unifies and it divides. It's an amazing thing. It's so capricious and mercurial. For me, I do know where I am in that, where I'm centered, but I don't know who else it works for. So I don't know if that's a conduit for what we're trying to do. And I don't know that it isn't. But I don't know, because I find religion to be so changeable and so quicksilver in our culture.
Well, it seems like when the religion is started,
Go ahead, Marilyn.
the original people, the original concepts are really pure, and then it gets organized, and then all these people interpret it, and then they tell you what you have to do and what you can't do, and they take words, and all of a sudden, in Judaism, there's a line in the Bible, and they develop this whole law of being kosher and what you can eat and what you can't eat, and what you can wrap, what you can eat in, and who do you have to go to get the approval. And it's so terribly complicated. You end up, you're worshiping all these extraneous things that don't reinforce it. But for me, it makes it less, less of a take when you say to be a good person, you have to eat certain things or eat certain things in certain ways. And I think that most religions do that. Some religions say you can't dance. Well, who says you can't dance? A group of people who got together and said it leads to other things. I think that's one of the problems, and that's why people keep leaving their traditional and going off to something fresh, and that something fresh eventually turns into the same old pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, it's I think religion is the problem, right? In my closing, I don't know if you guys ever noticed in my closing when I send from my Gmail, God gave us the word and the devil divided it into religion. It's right. So I'm of the mind, if we, when I talk about this stuff, I talk about the Bible as a text, as a philosophical book of text, and a message to humanity about, and it's really the way we think and treat one another, right? The way we think about ourselves, and we think about the planet, and we think about how to treat one another. I think religious, and I agree with you, Marilyn, I think anyone would, organized religion becomes a problem, because it tries to dictate the way those behaviors should be organized and should be followed, and who you should listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not necessarily the word. It's kind of man's interpretation of the word, as opposed to a person's individual interpretation, and how are they going to be a better person. Which is why I go back to, I think our message if it's going to, I think if people are going to resonate to it, it shouldn't be we're telling you how to think or we're telling you how to act or what to do. It's kind of a, here's a new way to think about things and how you engage with humanity and the planet. That's, you know, that's what I think more people would resonate to. No one wants a new, well, maybe some people want a new religion, but I think at the core is what I'm describing is what people are looking for.
I can't think of anything more confusing than to add another religion at this point. We've got enough trouble with the ones that we have. And I think I go along with Josephine, and it keys in with what I've found for myself, and that is sooner or later you face the dichotomy of religion and faith. And I've decided that I'm faith-based. I really am. And I love what came out of the book Tuesdays with Maury, in which he said repeatedly, the only real religion is to love one another. And at the root of it all for me, the Rosetta Stone for it all is the golden rule: treat people as you want to be treated. And that's what I follow. And I think that keys in with precepts of Christ. It does. But you know what it comes down to? It's that old story that the Jewish people don't recognize Jesus as the Son of God. The Christians don't recognize the Pope as God's emissary on earth. And Methodists don't recognize each other at Mohegan Sun. That's the way it all works.
How much is the message, if you strip away religion as the vehicle, how much is the message just to grow up? I just wonder that, you know, you think about, you know, children, you know, behave and can receive information in certain ways, and adults, as far as we've evolved now, you know, behave and receive information differently. But how much are we in a position of just telling people that we need to grow up more than we are now, without any judgmentality, but we need to grow up to see things differently in the way that adults see something differently than a child. That maybe this more evolved human being, this human becoming, could see something that qualitative differently than an adult does from a child, but we're still kind of in a child's position.
Years ago, I was in a group called the Academy of Religion and Mental Health that brought together religious people, ministers, priests, and people in the mental health area. And we used to meet regularly. And I remember one of the priests made an interesting statement that I still recall. And his comment was, Catholicism is a wonderful religion. He says, it's too bad no one practices it. And I think that's part of the issue. You know, it's our religions basically preach what we ought to have, we ought to be, but they don't teach it. You know, most of the religions teach, you know, if you think about it, most of the religions have had the idea that our way is the only right way. You know, unless you believe our religion. Remember, for 200 years, popes, you know, gave indulgences to people to go over the seas and kill Muslims. And, you know, I think what we're learning from evolution, we're learning from science by this recent discovery of who we are. You know, Darwin basically said, we're not individuals according to the Bible that were created 6,000 years ago in one day. We are started off as a single cell billions of years ago. And there are a lot of things have happened over that period of time. And if we understand that, and what we begin to understand from evolution is that and this is what I've tried to bring out earlier, is that what we've learned and what's part of our DNA, it's part of our genetic inheritance, is that it is our nature to be part of our tribe and to be prepared to compete with others by killing or whatever means to get adequate resources, food, water, whatever we need in order to survive. That's what we inherit as part of our DNA. But what is different, and then we created language, when we finally created language that we could tell stories and decide something, create some kind of civilization, the words we created were tribal words that tell us, be part of your particular patriotic group, be ready to die and fight for your country, be ready to die and fight for your religion, and be ready to do whatever you need to do for your political party. So you see, the issue is the language we've created, our ancestors have made us be in a stupor. We've made us to be kind of accepting this as a kind of an addiction by the way we think. And what's happened recently, and this is what science is telling us, we have now been given by whoever our creator is, we've been recently given this new organ, which we call a Genie organ now. And that Genie organ is the tool that we've been given so that we can create a new way of thinking. We can create a new way of thinking where we begin to realize, not just interested in me and my family and my tribe for here and today, we can begin to become more intellectually aware. We can develop the spiritual understanding, conceptual understanding, that if we can contribute our energy, we can contribute what we do for the benefit of the greater system, for the greater whole, then we can change from competition, win-lose competition, where someone wins and everyone loses. We can create instead a synergistic relationship where people contribute their creativity for the benefit of the whole. And when the benefit of the whole works together, then the whole system survives. And we see that in the most complex creation that our creator has made, which is us. You know, we are made of so-called 50 trillion cells now. We're a very complex organism. And what we see in our creative, looking at ourselves, we see that every one of our parts, every organ is designed to contribute its energy for the benefit of the greater whole. If any of the systems don't do their job, we call that a cancer or a disease, and the whole system dies. And now we're dealing with that in the world we're dealing with, that we have these different tribes who are now all of a sudden connected, they're working together, and they're not working synergistically to help one another, because that is the way we are. Science is telling us this is our nature, to be ready, to be prepared to be tribal, but we've been given the opportunity to communicate. We now create science, technology, where we can come together and we can create our genius to come up with a new way of thinking. That was Einstein's message. We need to develop a new way of thinking. And how do we do that? We do that by realizing that the words our ancestors created are addicting us to this one sentence. What's good for me, my family, my tribe, for here and now? And our task is, can we develop a new language, new words, such as I allow, I could, instead of I should? Can we develop these new substitute words where we take responsibility for ourselves? But it's difficult to do that because we're DNA prepared. We're already pre-programmed to say what's good for my tribe. That meme that we have is the addiction we have. And are we willing to get out of our comfort zone? That's the critical issue. I don't know that and I think that's the issue. Abby's at a meeting right now, or he's in New York. He told us he wouldn't be on, but I think that what he usually brings up is, but I'm more interested in what's good for me for now. I'm not sure I want to give up something else because my family comes first. And so that's the conundrum we really have. Are we prepared to get out of our comfort zone if we can realize that as long as we continue to be with the way we are, it is only a matter of time, because we're acting the same way we've always acted. You know, it used to be we would kill ourselves with sticks and stones and bows and arrows and fists, and both tribes would survive. And what Einstein is telling us, all that way of thinking, which was worked in the past, that's driven evolution. When you have bombs that everybody now has and kills everything, unless we change the way we think, it's only a matter of time before we're done. And to me, that is the issue. Can we develop a new set of vocabulary, a new set of words that can change our way of thinking to the one sentence, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future? That's where synergistic government comes in, rather than our present government, which is a capitalistic government, which says make more money, and that's essentially what we're seeing in our president. The United States is the right way, and everybody else must be evil and bad.
Do you think the new word, Don, is co-opetition?
That's a very good new word. Yes, that you've just created a very good word. And I think that that's one of the kinds of words. I think there are probably 100 words that would make a big difference. But what we've started with, you recall the very first meetings, we started with these 7 words that started with I think I can, and I could, and I allow, and either or, and what's going to make things better for me and you. And these are the 7 words that are so powerful, but we still haven't really paid much attention to them. We're just learning them. But if you go back and look at our earlier recordings, you'll notice that at our early meetings, we spent a lot of time talking about how bad or evil other people were and blaming and so on. And now you see, we're talking about, our group is very synergistic now. We're really talking about how we can follow one another's thread, how we can help one another, how we can co-create together. You don't hear so much as the kind of a thinking that went on earlier in our meetings. It's a good example, I think, how we've already changed just by learning these basic 7 words, which we really haven't spent that much time to really learn and practice.
I was thinking as you were discussing the organized religions, which we have only had for 6,000 years, what happened before that? Because if you think about it, monotheism is probably the greatest revolution we've ever had in history. We were practicing sun gods. We were praying to the golden calf. Who was it who came up with the idea of there is one God in search of love of his people, as well as people who were in search of God? And I think back to a teenage kid maybe who came home one night and said to his parents, "Hey, Mom and Dad, the way you've been praying all these years and the way you've been acting, that doesn't sit right with me. There has to be something more to life. There has to be a God in search of people rather than just people in search of God." And you can imagine those poor parents when they looked at each other and said, "God, where did we go wrong?" I think that there is that organized religion, although I don't believe in all of it. It was a huge revolution, and it was man thinking about something more than just himself. I think we need to be cognizant of that and maybe give some credit to whoever came up with the idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was centuries and centuries and centuries and thousands of years, whatever, ago. There was a need for the church as the first body of authority, the first body of law. It was a barrier that kept people from killing one another because someone stole a chicken out of your yard or whatever. It was the church that established rules of behavior and enforced them.
Yes, but long before that, when people were just killed at someone's will, when people were just thrown into a fire every New Year's, the king was thrown into a fire and they had a new king instead. I mean, all of these things were horrific before people thought of an idea of a God and law and organized a society. As Don pointed out, we're billions of years old. We're not thousands of years old. So organized religion, whether we approve wholeheartedly of it or not, is still a huge revolution in mankind.
And yet in some cultures, all of this evolved and became civilized, and in other cultures, it remained medieval to this day.
Well, a lot of cultures also failed. Roman Empire, many cultures did not survive.
I gotta say though, some of the things that we think about today as barbaric or medieval or not sophisticated, that they haven't evolved. I don't know, like the people, like when Basu was, not Basu, when Shirat was speaking earlier about his mom and worshiping the plants and worshiping the sun, I, I'm like, well, we kind of do that now. We call it, environmentalism, right? Or,
Yeah.
so it's kind of, it's the same, but it's different. It's the language, right, that we use to attach and ascribe to the behavior. I don't think that we should be tossing, virgins into a volcano. However, we look at the Me Too movement. Women are still in a terrible position, and we are still being destroyed, and our bodies are still being used, in political and social ways that we think is wrong. So I don't know. It's the same, but it's different. We call it different things. I think if anything, our history is teaching us that we have not evolved as much as we would like to think we have. And I think every day we have an opportunity to be better. And that difference in that being better starts with each of us.
Well, I think this is what we're learning from evolution. That's why, again, evolution is, the whole concept is only 150 years old, and it's been rejected for most of that time. People have been punished for teaching evolution, for thinking evolution, but evolution is based on the scientific method. Basically, it's based on cause and effect. It's based on it's a fact base, that's facts that are confirmed by people all over the world, by scientists all over the world. And what are we learning from evolution? You see, is that I think the message as I see it is that we're learning that we have been given our creator, however you want to define our creator, whether you call it God or nature, you could call it nature, that our creator has recently provided us this special organ, Genie organ, that's not all that old, that enables us now to create language. And the difference is that we have the ability to assume responsibility for ourselves. That instead of looking to someone else to take care of us and bargain, as we did in the Hawaiian incident, I will give up things, so I'll get on my knees, I'll pray, I'll bargain with you now. Instead of bargaining, we've already been given the ability to be creators. We've been given the most marvelous gift that one could give us, the opportunity for mental freedom to decide what would we like our life to be. Can we create this heaven on earth? Can we create an environment that is synergistic? Think of a world where we use our energy now for research, for education, instead of for creating weapons and bombs and the things that we're using it for now. I mean, that's our craziness. Don't you? I mean, it's so obvious that we're pretty insane. I say we are normal, that it's normal to still be tribal because that's the way we've been born and programmed. But what used to be sane is no longer sane anymore. It's insane to keep making bombs and bigger bombs that kill ourselves. Mutual assured destruction would be an example of that. The answer to preserving our life is making bigger bombs, when we can actually, our common sense would tell us that what would be more appropriate is how can we learn to get rid of these bombs and learn to cooperate for a mutual benefit, so we can use our energy and resources to become wiser and find better health cures, the plants that work for health, and to raise our kids to be more instead of with fear, instead of with love. These are the kind of things that I think, can we become aware that we've been given that opportunity. So we are the ones. So if we want to pray, we need to pray to ourselves and say, what is it that I need to do that will make a difference? That is essentially what a Genie seminar is. We're meeting here to ask ourselves, what can we do to use our creative energy now to come up with better ways to deal with things? And this is a relatively unorthodox way of education. Most education is still talking heads, where you go and somebody is a professor who tells you this is the way you're supposed to think. It's the way we learn. Every child is given their professor, which is their parent, saying this is the religion you're supposed to have. This is the political party you're supposed to follow. This is the country you're supposed to be prepared to die for. So I think this is the question: are we indeed waking ourselves up here? I think in a way that's our mission. We wake ourselves up and then clean up and show up and wise up. That's the question. But it's hard to leave our comfort zone. Our comfort zone is still their basic motto, and it's hard to be honest with ourselves about this, but our basic motto is still what's good for me, the original unconditional love, what's good for my family, that's the second level of unconditional love, what's good for my tribe, the third level, what's good so that I can procreate, I know I have to do that, that's kind of built into me. And now we're at this next stage of evolution, we get to the issue of unconditional, universal, or global love and forgiveness. That's the message of Jesus and other leaders. Jesus isn't the only one who said that. There are other people before that who said that, what the new version of the Golden Rule, which, Brad gave his version, the version that I've proposed as the modern version is love ourselves with the abundance that overflows to enrich the world. We are creators of love. Just as we can create hate. That's the freedom we've been given with this marvelous brain. So far we've managed to create a lot of hate. You go back to the South Pacific song, you've got to be taught hate. And we are taught a lot of hate. We're taught prejudice and so on. And it's because we've been pre-programmed over a period of many years that the normal healthy thing was to be part of a tribe and be prepared to cut off people's heads so that our tribe could survive. We live in a world now we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to compete for limited food. We can create enough food for everybody, and we know how to limit our population. Just the early life, the plankton. One plankton would create 500 generations in their lifetime. And those 500 generations created 500 generations. So you can see how rapidly initially we multiplied because the plankton is multiplying because other species feed on plankton. The plankton has a purpose. They make themselves multiple so others can live and feed on them. Whales live on plankton. But we don't have to create life that can be eaten, serve as food for others anymore. We know how to create food. We've been given that opportunity. We know how to make enough water. We also know how to limit our population so we don't have to overpopulate the world. But we're not doing any of these things. We're doing what's comfortable, which is getting more power, more money, and so on. But that's the way we've all been brought up. So that's my conclusion. And so I think the issue is, this is the way our Genie seminars, if we can stick with it, we can come up with our own genius, our own creativity, and understand from evolution that we are the ones, we've been given the opportunity, but we've got a lot to learn yet. We're still in a very early stage of evolution. We've been given this organ, this special organ that allows us to think only 1 billion years ago, and it was only 50,000 years ago that we developed primitive language. And then the language we developed was a tribal language, which we all have been learned and we've all used. A tribal language which says, these are the words that tell you how to be dedicating yourself to your particular tribe. I don't know whether we can go to the next level, which is, can we go to global love or universal love rather than simply our family or our patriotic or whatever love. Maybe it's too late. That's the big question. Maybe it's better off that, as someone said, suspend your retirement money now because there's no chance we have. Give up, be pessimistic, and forget about it all. But I think those of us who are here still have a glimmer of hope that we do have the ability to make a difference. That's my pep talk for today.
Well, it would be just my luck to spend my retirement money now and then nothing happens for the next 25 years.
Wouldn't that be disappointing?
It would be. Yeah. Well, I've also come away from this today with renewed respect for plankton. I'm going to think about plankton more often. And Don, seriously, it almost sounds as though for Anwat, we've hit upon a new version of the golden rule, and maybe it should be Anwat's golden rule version 2.0. And it is as you said.
Last comments, please, because we're getting a little overdue here.
Okay, we'll just briefly say, I shared with my grandmothers a little bit about what we're doing, and one of the grandmother's comments was that Barbara has tilled the soil and Don has placed the furrows, and now we're all, putting the seeds in those furrows. And I just thought all of your words were beautiful and can only expound on by saying that everyone has something valuable to say and we want to hear it. And it's the people's need to be heard. I think that one of the early religious keep people down was confession is good for the soul. And it is, but you have to tell it to me. Now we can all tell it to each other and listen to one another's issues. And thank you for listening to me.
Any other final comments? Okay. Well, I appreciate the words of one of your grandmothers, Katie. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the idea that that we're suggesting, if we can start a movement of Genie seminars, you see, that's the way we create a worldwide opportunity. It's the fastest, easiest way we can create a worldwide system like AA, where people can share their genius, where you can get people not just simply listening to professors or talking heads or priests or ministers, but you can also share our own personal genius and create some solutions that are new and original, getting out of our comfort zone. So thank you, and we'll hope to see you all next week. And I will be sending you a recent essay that will hopefully solve all of these problems.
Okay.
Have a wonderful week, everybody.
Thank you.